to Book 101 Review. Book 101 is all about books that I read for the last 40 years. And today I have my special guest. She's internet reseller, frequent auction, offender, entrepreneur, guest speaker, and of course an author too, and the author of the book Fabric Wars, no other than Miss Kira Hartley Klinger. Welcome to Book 101, Miss Kira, and can you please introduce more about yourself?
Hi, good morning, Daniel. Thank you for having me on the show. Yeah, I've been writing most of my life. I didn't finally publish something until a few years ago, and now I've published a few books. But it started because of my journey in resale on the internet and things that I would buy and sell, and the stories behind the things that I would buy and sell appealed to my customers. And, I had several requests that I put them together into a book. And so then the first book came about. And then, I'm constantly going to sales and auctions and estate sales. So the stories continue. So a second book came about, and there's a third one in the works.
Yes, congratulations, and thank you so much for sharing your knowledge and wisdom to the world. What first drew you to the competitive world of vintage fabric hunting?
Fabric happened by accident. I started buying and selling as a side hustle to make extra money. And I was buying anything that was selling cheap and seeing whether or not I could make money on it. And at one point, fabric became an opportunity. And most of the fabric that I buy and sell typically comes from estate sales, from people that were quilters and crafters, and who had passed on, and the family was you know cleaning up the estate and whatnot. So most of my fabric comes from there. But yeah, fabric was completely accidental. I had no idea that there was going to be an audience out there for vintage fabric and fabric that was out of print. um, so I built this following, and it started in my one shop. I started with a shop on eBay, and then the fabric became so popular that I started its own shop on Etsy. And that's kind of eventually what led to the books. While the books talk a lot about hunting down this vintage fabric and the estates that I go to and the people that I meet and the auctioneers and the competition, they also talk about my other journeys, not only with other things that I buy and sell, but also just in life. It's kind of like a journal in a way.
A journal, indeed. And how do you describe the fabric wars to someone new to this niche?
So imagine going to an estate sale. I'll give a chapter, for example. There's a chapter in the first book called Thieving Thelma. And Thieving Thelma was probably 80 years old. And she happened to be somebody that I came across when I went to an estate sale. And this estate sale had rows and rows and rows of boxes of fabric in the backyard, and they were kind of scattered. They were not all together. There might be, five boxes in this row and four boxes in that row. And the auctioneers always have this order of events, how they're going to sell things. And so, they typically, the row lots that are in the backyard of these auctions, the auctioneer will walk up and down the row lots, and he will take bids for choice of what you want in this row lot. And if you win the bid, you can pick as many as you want. So I'm going through these row lots, and I am having the high bid, and I'm picking all the boxes of fabric, and nobody else has beat me on any of the bids. I'm winning all of it. So it gets to the point where the auctioneer wants to go inside the house and start selling things. So he stops selling outside. Well, there's still one big box of fabric that I want, but I go inside with the auctioneer, see what he's selling and whatnot. When I come back outside, that box has disappeared. It's just gone. And so I talk to people, I try to figure out where did this box go? And there was a young man that I asked, and he said, "Oh, well, that woman over there told me that she bought it and asked me to put it in her car. And so it's in her car." And it was this 80-year-old woman. Okay. So, in going back into the house and talking to the auctioneer, and saying, "Hey, look, we have a problem." And everybody then stopped what they were doing and came outside to see what was going on. And this 80-year-old woman, she says, I didn't take it. I don't know what you're talking about. And they walked over to her car. And of course, there's this box of fabric, and now this 80-year-old woman gets very, very angry. And she says, well, she's buying all the fabric and she's pointing at me, and I was just like, okay. And they ended up throwing her out of the auction, so there's this 80-year-old woman that got caught stealing, and they threw her out. And it was just it is just one type of story that is in the book. I mean, every new acquisition is an adventure, and just because an auctioneer advertises that there might be fabric at this sale, a lot of times there's not fabric at this sale. Auctioneers really do not care at all about fabric. So those stories come out in the book too. And what it led to instead, because there's always something that I find instead. And there's always, a funny story about the competition or the auctioneer or, somebody that I've met along the way.
What makes certain vintage fabrics so valuable or sought after?
There is a certain kind of fabric. Okay, so Depression era fabric is very popular, and it's been popular for years. Tides change, trends change. Depression era fabric is fabric that came out in the 1930s and the 1940s. And one thing that happened during the Depression era is that people were always trying to figure out how to save money, and companies included. So companies that produced flour and sugar and grain and animal feed, they would produce these things in large cloth sacks. And during the Depression, they decided to make those sacks printed, and they would put flowers on it, or they would put polka dots on it, or checks or patterns, whatever. And the intent was that when the item that was stored in that bag was used or consumed, that then the woman of the household would have this yard worth of fabric that she could make clothing with for the family, or that she could put into a quilt. And so this fabric is referred to as feed sack fabric, or feed sack, or flour sack. And it is highly desirable. And there are some patterns and colors that bring more money than others, but there are single feed sacks that will sell for several $100s. And so that is something that I constantly search for. It is something that is the needle in a haystack. It is very hard to find. There are a few chapters in my book that talk about the times that I did find feed sack. So, that's one instance. Certainly, antique fabric that is early 1900s, there's an audience for that. Um, and then, we all kind of relate to our childhoods too. And so I have a large audience of people that are looking for a fabric that they remember from their childhood. And it might pop up in my store and I'll get a message. "Oh my gosh, I haven't seen this fabric in 40 years. I had a dress made out of this when I was a little girl. I have to have this fabric." So it touches like memory too. There's also a lot of designers out there that are sought after, and they're out of print patterns. Fabric goes out of print just like anything else, and their out of print patterns also can become valuable. So yeah, it was something I never expected to learn about. And another interesting thing that has happened in my shop, I sell a lot of salvage textiles. So if I come across a quilt, say, that has been stored in somebody's chest for decades after decades, and nobody has used this quilt because it's full of holes and tattered and torn, if I take that quilt home and I cut it into pieces, there are people out there that will buy those pieces and make something new from it. So I've developed this audience that will buy salvaged and recycled textiles for whatever project that they're working on or thing that they're making for their own shop. And it has a really big market. There's a lot of people out there, especially in this generation, that is really passionate about reusing what's already out there, and trying to reduce the waste.
What are your most reliable sources for finding rare fabrics?
Typically, my best luck is to source out these estate auctions, and there are search engines that you can use on the internet that take you to calendars of sales, and you can see what they're offering. Um, it like I said, it's difficult. I probably find maybe 3 to 4 really good fabric sales a year, and some of them are completely accidental. I mentioned that auctioneers don't typically get excited about fabric. So it falls on me to try to read between the lines and do a little bit of research. A recent sale that I went to, the auctioneer did not advertise fabric at all. What he advertised was a country estate and sewing machines and quilts. And so the first thing I did was read the woman's obituary. And I found out that she was a longtime member of a quilting guild. I do guest speaking at quilting guilds quite frequently. I bring a little bit of my shop with me, I bring the book with me. Quilters buy fabric, right? So it's this great connection. So one thing that I learned by doing these guest appearances is that quilters typically have more fabric than they know what to do with. So by reading that she was a longtime member of a quilt guild, I was like, she has fabric. I know there's going to be fabric at this sale. Even though the auctioneer said there was no fabric, I know there's going to be fabric. So I go to this estate and they have like box cars from trains that are planted in the yard. There's two of them. And inside one of them were just tote after tote after tote, big plastic containers full of fabric. And there was more fabric inside the house. So it was completely unadvertised, but yet I've been doing this so long that I look at a list and I'm like, oh, there's a good possibility, and I show up and sometimes I get lucky. I've tried to look, there's a lot of groups on Facebook that sell fabric. A lot of that fabric, though, is current. And quite honestly, they're asking a price for their fabric that it's a good price versus going to the store and buying retail, but it's not a good price for me. I need to buy all of it for a good price, and then I can break it down and make money on it.
Share a story about your most dramatic fabric war or the time competition got intense.
Okay, so typically the competition for me is usually manageable. And I feel badly saying this, but it's entirely true. Usually my competition are elderly women that quilt. They're out there looking for a great deal on a box of fabric. And it's there's not a lot of younger people that quilt these days. So I'm sad that it's probably going to be something that goes by the wayside one day. Um, so anyway, I don't usually have problems beating that competition, although I do feel badly because they come to the sale hopeful just like I do. They stay at the sale all day long just like I do, and then they leave with nothing, you know. And it's not uncommon for me to walk into one of these sales that is advertised fabric and for people to recognize me and go, "Oh God, she's here." So I don't typically have a problem with the competition. So this one sale that I went to, and everybody in my book has a secret name, a secret identity. It allows me to really explore and divulge everything that has happened without worrying about offending somebody or upsetting somebody. So this one sale that I went to had an incredible amount of fabric. The woman who had owned it was a tremendous quilter and crafter, and there were tables and tables and tables and tables of fabric. And I is like, oh my gosh, look at all the fabric. And of course, all the usual people were there. So the bidding gets going, and there's one person there that I've never seen before. And I've been doing this 20 years, and I've never seen this woman. And she is a little bit younger than me. I call her the redhead whenever I talk about it because she had short red hair. But in the book, she's Krabby Patty. And so very quickly, the bidding comes down to just the two of us. Everybody else has kind of faded into the background because their maximum bid has already been reached. And my longtime strategy whenever I am bidding on something is that for the first round, um, I don't stop until it's mine. And then, no matter what I pay, I don't stop until I've won the first bid, because then the person who's bidding against me kind of says, "Oh, all right, well, I see how much she's willing to spend." And then the next round, oftentimes they quit sooner because they figure we're going to get up to the heavens eventually anyway. And so then it just gets cheaper and cheaper and cheaper. And, I've established myself. I'm here to play. I'm here to win. I'm here to buy it all. Get out of my way. So this woman was not backing down. And I think I spent $200 for my first pick of fabric, which is probably 4 times the amount that I normally have to spend to get my first pick of fabric. I'm like, "Oh my gosh, what am I gonna pick?" Because I'm not gonna go down the row and pick them all. It's $200 a box, and there's countless boxes. So I'm just looking around trying to figure out which one to pick, so I just grab one. I'm like, "All right, I spent 200, it's all right, next one will be better." Same thing. Every single time she's bidding me up, bidding me up, bidding me up. And those boxes were all selling for like 150 to $200 a box. And not a single other person at that sale bought any fabric. At the end of the day, it came down to either Krabby Patty or me. It was back and forth, back and forth. And I'm not used to letting anybody else have any fabric. So the auctioneer helpers, I call them the henchmen. They will come in when something like this bidding war is going on and there's a lot of things to sell. They will swoop in, grab what that person has just bought, and they will start a pile for them. And this enables the auctioneer to keep going and not have to stop while the winning bidder moved their item. So you've got these henchmen that's moving her box, my box, her box, my box, her box, my box. And these two piles are being created on opposite sides of the wall. Okay, well, henchmen don't really care if they put the right box in the right place. They're just there doing their, minimum wage paid job, and they're just moving things. So when there was a break in selling fabric and they went to sell yarn, which Krabby Patty went to buy the yarn too, I started walking past the two piles because I wanted to make sure that none of my fabric was in her pile. I mean, I just paid $200 a box.
Mm,
So
yes.
was not touching anything. It's kind of, you don't touch other people's things. So I'm walking past her pile and I'm just looking. And from across the room, she's over here bidding on yarn, for crying out loud. And I'm over here just looking, not touching. From across the room, she yells, "Hey!" I don't know. And I turn around and I look at her and she's like, "I don't appreciate that." And everybody's looking at me and everybody's looking at her. And I was like, I did nothing. I did not do a thing. I didn't touch your stuff. And, it kind of came full circle because they had a follow up auction to this auction. And I went back and forth. Am I going to go? Because I'm just going to get beat up again. I spent so much money. I just, am I going to go again? And I kept saying, well, if I don't go, she's going to buy all of it. And that kind of hurts my ego a little bit. So, of course, I went. Same thing. By now the auctioneers are bragging to everybody because they never before cared about fabric. But now they want everybody to know, hey, at the last auction, the fabric sold for $200 and $300, and they want to impress everybody to try to get them to bid again. So anyway, it's pretty much a repeat of the first sale. um and even though she hollered at me the first time, I still kind of peeked at her pile. But in my pile, I found two boxes that belonged to her. And so, of course, I'm thinking, oh gosh, this is kind of justice. She made me spend so much money. I could just not even say a word and just take her boxes and put them in my car, and she'll probably never know because our piles are huge, right? It's like, I just can't be dishonest. So I walk over to this woman who had hollered at me previously for exactly what happened in the second sale. And I tapped her on the shoulder and she kind of turned around and looked at me. And I'm like, I think I've got two of your boxes. So she followed me over there, and her husband followed along too. He's her protector or whatever. And we get over to my stack and I'm like, yeah, I think that's yours. And she looked at it and she looked at me and she was kind of like really, I don't know, abashed, I guess. And she said, yeah, that is my box. And they picked it up and I said, yeah, I think that one's yours too. And she was like, it is. And she just kind of looked at me and she was like, thank you. Not, I know that was really hard for her to say thank you. And it's like, yeah, you're welcome. She's really not happy about, but it just, I haven't seen Krabby Patty in probably 2 years, maybe 3 years. And there's this phenomenon that happens where I'll give you an example. This one couple showed up at this auction house that I used to go to all the time, and nobody had seen them before. And they started buying everything, didn't matter what it was. And everybody that was there to buy and sell, like me, were all kind of rolling our eyes, saying, oh, what is it with these people? Well, it turns out that they had won the lottery. And so they thought that the best way to invest their money was to buy and sell and make their money grow. Well, they went broke because they didn't really know what they were doing, and they just disappeared. So this woman, this Krabby Patty, she had been bragging to everybody at the sale, hey, I've got this new shop that I opened with my sister. You'll have to come on by. And she's trying to pass out business cards. And she's passing out business cards to people that she had beat out on buying things. So now she didn't let them win this item they wanted, but she's going to invite them to her store to come buy that item. And it was a strange situation. So anyway, I have not seen her. I used to have nightmares about her, get her anxiety. A fabric sale would come up and it's like, oh, is Krabby Patty going to be there? God, I hope she's not going to be there. But yeah, I kind of feel like maybe she petered out. She found out it was not all that it was cracked up to be. And I'm sorry, Krabby Patty, but I'm okay with it. It's all
So, Miss Kira,
100% okay with it.
yes, so Miss Kira, before we wrap up our discussion for today, I'm inviting you to please to listen to my other podcast, people, my other podcast, because my Abstract Essay is already in fifth season, Abstract Poetry in second season, and my Book 101 review in fifth season too. Comedy 101 in second season, and my Food 101 in fifth season as well. Geography 101 in fourth season, and my baby podcast, Law 101 and Mental Health 101, Love Letters in its third season, and Movie 101 Review and Music 101 in its fourth season, and Science 101 and Sex 101 in its first season. Please listen to them wherever you listen your podcasts. Miss Kira, what are your short term and long term goals as an author, internet reseller, frequent auction, entrepreneur, as well as guest speaker?
The auctions are probably my favorite part of what I do, but I have a tremendous amount of inventory, so I'm kind of rooted down to trying to get through it. I do have a third book that I am working on. I am really enjoying doing the podcasting right now. And it's a long story behind it, but I
Yes.
also released a children's book this year. So there's a children's book series that's coming that has nothing to do with what I'm doing, but it has a lot to do with our grandchildren. So I'm just, writers need to write. And so I'm
Yes,
always just keep on writing.
definitely. Keep writing because the world's needed, Miss Kira. And what would be your piece of advice for those people out there who want to be like you?
My piece of advice is to don't give up and to be willing to think out of the box. My writing journey started 40 years ago, and I started out in fiction, and I spent 10 years trying to publish my books the traditional route, and it did not work out. And so these books I decided to publish myself. And it's nonfiction now instead of fiction. It was a direction I did not expect. I've had opportunities for these books, including podcast interviews, and I have a relationship with a TV producer. So these are all things that I never thought were going to happen. And if you quit trying on your journey, if you give it up, you'll never find out what's around the corner for you.
Yes, people, don't give up. Try until you succeed. What's your dream project using the perfect vintage find?
My dream project?
Yes,
Is that what you said?
yes.
Oh gosh. Boy, that's a tough one. I mean, I really want to complete at least 7 or 8 editions of this children's book that we started. I started it with my best friend who has painted all the covers of my books. She wanted to illustrate a children's book, so that's one of my goals. I would like to have those books to leave behind for our grandchildren. I look at a lot of what I write and what I do. Um, and I think about the footprint I'm leaving. I'm thinking about what I'm leaving behind. So I think just continuing in that direction of being mindful of what I'm putting out there and where I'm spending my time. We prioritize time with our family and with our grandchildren. I prioritize time to give back. I do quite a bit of charity work. It's just, yeah, mindful of what I leave behind.
Mindful indeed. Miss Kira Hartley Klinger, thank you so much for sharing your knowledge and wisdom to the world. So, can you please invite our listeners to support your books, your business, or whatever projects that you're doing right now?
You can find me on Etsy if you're curious about fabric, if you already love fabric, if you're a crafter, a creator, or if you even just want to talk.
Yes, people, let's support Miss Kira Hartley Klinger because if you support her, for sure, more and more and more empowering books to come, more and more empowering business to come. So, Miss Kira, thank you so much for your time.
Yes, thank you for having me, Daniel.
Marticon people, see you soon.